Welcome to Talk Design Podcast, the space where creativity meets conversation. I'm Adrian Ramsey, your host, and as someone deeply entrenched in the world of design, I'm thrilled to introduce you to the minds that inspire me in the hope that they will spark something special within you too. From a design past crafting women's swimwear to pushing the boundaries of performance sportswear, from mountaineering to international yachting, to implementing systematic innovation solutions that transcend boundaries in aerospace industry. My heart remains rooted in architecture, and exploring the emotional tapestry woven by built spaces is my fascination. My journey in design has been what can only be described as a life of design. I want to thank you for lending me your ears. I'm eager to embark on this next episode together. My guest on Talk Design today is Kory from Utah. Now, Kory's firm is Oxford Architecture, and there's a story why it's called Oxford Architecture, but we'll get Kory to tell you that. We're going to have a wonderful chat around architecture, the styles, what it means, how it works, and what he's done in his practice and where he came from. So, Kory, welcome to Talk Design.
Thank you, Adrian. Happy to be here.
Hey, man, let's kick off with, the simple stuff, the stuff that's never going to be a tricky question to answer, like, why architecture? How come? How did you even know there was a thing called architecture? How did you discover it? And, what were the influences? So start as a little boy.
Yeah, I blame my parents. They raised me playing with Legos. So it was all kind of writing on the wall all throughout. But I had kind of a design inspiration moment when I was in high school. There's a reservoir near here, 500 kilometers away, called Lake Powell.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And we were there on a family trip. I was a teenager, and we were cruising through one of the channels in my, grandpa's little boat, getting just completely destroyed by these 6-foot swells. It was kind of windy that day, and so the water was choppy. And we barely had control of our boat. Mm-hmm. And then opposite us, come through the channel, this, about 50-foot yacht. And this yacht cut right through the waves as if they weren't even there. You could see people walking on the deck of that ship as if they were having no discomfort at all. And I was struck in that moment by how very similar design principles can give you such drastically different results due to, scale and different things. So I was in high school at that time, or secondary school. And so I got myself into a lot of drafting classes and drawing classes, did a variety of competitions at the state and national level in design, and was very interested in, naval architecture for a period, but ended up pivoting just for, I realized I live in a landlocked state. So pivoted into building architecture kind of even by the end of high school, and have been chasing that dream ever since.
Wow, that's interesting. The naval architecture thing is something that recently one of my friends who's an architect had said to me, hey, would you be interested in doing some stuff with, like boats? And I'm like, oh, yeah, like what sort? And he's like, super yachts. And I said, oh, yeah, but like, what do you mean doing some stuff? He said, designing them. And I went, no. And anyway, we were having this conversation around it. I said, I'd be interested in what it takes to fit them out and what you could do with them, but I don't want to design a super yacht. I don't want to have to learn that process. He's a forever student. And I said to him, it'd be interesting. I've got friends who have been captains of big super yachts. I said, why don't we get a call together with one of them and find out, some stuff. And it was really interesting. Like when you said you looked at naval architecture, what did you find out from that journey of looking at what they did, naval architect versus architect that works where there's ground underneath it?
Yeah, I don't know that I got as deep into the research as I could have. And it's something that I kind of still follow to this day, just kind of as a passing interest of mine. And they're doing some really interesting things with like hydrofoil boats now. But even back then, I think I was struck by how engineering heavy the design had to be. The architecture and the engineering were very closely, tied together. Nothing could be done in isolation. Where in building design, we try and bring things together as much as possible. But even to this day, I think a lot of the disciplines sort of operate in a silo. A I have operations within my design process to, force people to look at each other's drawings. And obviously everyone works with me as a sort of the central hub. But, how often do you see structure talking to electrical or what have you? Not very often, right? But in the design of a boat, it's everything is very closely tied together, right? Because, things like the balance of the ship and weight distribution is something that we don't have to think about very much, but they have to think very closely about how that works.
Well, that was the interesting stuff that I really discovered with it. So in talking to a few different people, but one particular friend of mine, Dave, who, super yacht captain for many, many years and very tied into the industry, he was saying to me, like he'd fitted off several super yachts as the captain, So as a captain employed at the construction stage, so working for somebody who's got a super yacht who goes, I'm going to build another one. And the captain, sort of directing some of the, almost like the client would, but from the technical point of view of what the boat needs versus what the client needs. It's a bit like, we use an engineer and they say, well, you can do that. This is how we have to do it. Or you can't do that because there is no way of holding that together, or you need to give me some of this or some of that. And that thing, I'm like, well, so what happens if you, fill it with marble or if you fill it with whatever when it's a boat, when you're fitting it off? And he goes, well, there's kind of weight tolerances and there's obviously loading tolerances as to how that works. And I said, but who tells you? Like, who tells you what you're going to, and he said, the naval architect. He said, that's the person who is your go-to with everything. And I said, so like, are they the engineer as well? And he said, they know so much about engineering, whether they will consult with other engineers as well, but they will be naval engineering. Yeah, it was fascinating, like really, really fascinating, and then the shapes of hulls and as you said before about that boat on Lake Powell, the water line, where the water line sits, what shape the boat is, how it cuts through the water, how long it is. And then, you just said before about hydrofoiling boats. I'm a big fan of the America's Cup and it had a lot to do with it back when it was still monohull, and worked with, different America's Cup teams, not in design of boats or anything, in design of clothing. But with that part of it, nowadays where aeronautics is probably playing a bigger, in the racing scheme, a bigger space now with hydrofoiling. It's all about, lifting the boat out of the water and getting it to go beyond fast, like multiples on its wind speed. And so you've changed boating again. And even to the point where they're doing round the world races with those, with hydrofoiling boats, it's, the boats with this ability to free themselves of the water. So they're almost flying machines that are using water for the energy as opposed to building water and, so they use water and the wind for the energy. And you look at the event of that into surfboards as well. And again, you've got these winged surfboards where, the hydrofoiling on waves. Yeah, on waves, off waves. It's like the whole thing.
It's really cool stuff. I'm interested to see how what they learn in racing will trickle down to yachts. Day-to-day boating of various kinds. There's a very strong boating culture here in northern Utah. Just small pleasure craft. All of the fresh mountain reservoirs that we have in the mountains, and I just can't wait to see someone wakeboarding. One of these high oil boats. But maybe not wakeboarding. Actually, you want the wake, but maybe water skiing.
Yeah, although exactly. There's going to be some amazing things, and I know with the sailcraft that from big to small there is, and currently the Sail GP is, I think it's in Los Angeles at the moment. So that's where there's the sort of America's Cup style trimarans and, well, they're not even trimarans. They're just boats. They're single hulls, but with big wings off either side. So but those things are doing 100 kilometers an hour. People wear Kevlar suits on them, Kevlar vests and stuff to stop them from the impact when the boat hits the water if it hits it the wrong way and stuff like that. It's pretty crazy stuff. So yeah, that
Kind of a brutal sport.
yeah, it takes a lot. All of a sudden, the thing's moving very, very fast. And
Mhm.
yeah, I look at that and I go, we're still working with static buildings and they don't go anywhere. But as you said, getting the people in a line to talk is also one of these things, like how that happens and how you get it to work seamlessly so that everybody's needs are met. And Joe, I think, well, you tell me your experience with that. I find certainly that a lot of the time they're not used to being asked, so they don't know how the dialogue's meant to work. You know, like you said, with electrical or something, unless it's commercial, they're not used to being asked. They're just used to being make it fit.
Yeah.
That's kind of the,
Yeah.
yeah. So from doing that, then you went to architectural school where? In Utah?
So I did my undergrad here in Utah, actually in business. And at that time, I was already working in architecture. And I did business school kind of as a strategic pairing of, complementary skill sets. So I've just started my firm. It's brand new here in the past year. I spent about 20 years working for a variety of firms, here and a few other places. But I always knew I wanted to start my own firm. And so even back then, I chose to do my education a little bit non-traditionally, which has made me jump through a few extra hoops.
So take me down that journey.
Yeah. So that was at Westminster College here in Salt Lake City. I got a fantastic education there, thoroughly enjoyed that time. Shortly after that, I was hit with sort of an intense wanderlust, wanted to see different parts of the world. So I applied to a few different schools in England and was accepted into Oxford Brookes there in Oxford, England. So I headed out there for a couple of years and had a great time. That was a very challenging program, very art-focused design there. And I was really inspired by a lot of my colleagues. But I also say that all the traveling that I did in that period also informed my design to a great degree, at least as great a degree as what I learned in the classroom.
So when you say it was very arts-based type program, tell me what you mean by that, as opposed to being, I suppose, technical, is it?
Yeah, as opposed to being technical. At that time I had 8 years of experience, so technically I knew how to put together a building, but I had not had any instruction in the art behind it or the theory. How do you craft a building program? Where do you begin? So many times in the early part of my career, I'd have, a principal come to my desk with a sketch that they had done with a client there, and they would say, here, put this into 3D, make it real. And so I could take it from there all the way to the end of construction documentation. And I had a very strong grounding in that. But it was that first 5% of design that I was very interested in. And so as I was choosing schools, that's what I was looking for. And that's what they offered.
Right. Okay. And so with that style of it, like, I mean, as you say, you were choosing schools that did that. With the style of how they did it, was there any really big differences? Say, obviously you had the wanderlust as well. And the other schools that you looked at, out of them and others, like what was the sort of the nuances or the differences that made you go, this is a place where I'm going to actually learn about, the bigger context of it. You kind of go from at least nationwide, then down into, piece by piece by piece, dropping it down until you become this piece. So you've got cultural things as well as you've got physical things, and then you end up with finally your physical space and your neighborhoods, and then down into the piece that you are allowed to influence, which is whatever bit of land you're going to build on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, take me through that kind of journey of understanding that from having had that technical thing. Did you look back on all the work that you'd done? Not you'd necessarily created, but that you were working on, somebody else had, and went, oh my God, they had no idea about that stuff. Or what? I certainly go to a lot of architectural projects, and the number of times I go, really, this does not work with the site. This is not well informed. I bet you this architect is from another place altogether.
Yeah.
In fact, I interviewed a guy the other day, and he's in the US Virgin Islands. It hasn't come out yet. And we were talking about a job he's doing in St. Thomas. And he said, oh, it's by long steps. And I said, this is so typical of this. This was history based, though. So it was St. Thomas was actually owned by the Danish for a long period of time, and the Danes built the main town. I don't know whether you've ever been there, and it has I haven't either yet. Well, will be, but he's got this project, and it's got long steps that go up beside it. Well, when that town was drawn by some, we'll call them a town planner. I don't know that they had that title, but somebody that the king had draw it in Denmark, and they drew those as streets, but they were like this. They had no idea of the topography, so they didn't know the
also the wind
topography.
direction as well.
Yeah, exactly. They just thought it was flat, so they drew them as streets, but they had to become stairs. They were too steep for streets. So yeah, just that kind of thing. So when you go back and you go, look, I drew all these things for 8 years. I drew other people's essentially projects or their designs and made them work. Yeah. What kind of context?
Yeah, I frequently look back on some of those designs and go, oh man, I wish we had done that differently. My first job actually was with a production home builder, doing like starter homes and things. And so I reflect on those designs. And I think that that's a very important segment of the market. Most people are never going to hire an architect to do a custom home, right? So it's important that there's a lot of homes built that people can live in, whether it's custom design or not. But I watched their design process, and like even then, I knew that there were flaws. I'm like, you're creating a design without any sight in mind. You have no idea which direction it's going to be placed on the lot. You're going to put it on 100 different lots. It's going to have all these different placements, and there's no discussion about how the sun is going to hit the different facades, and how, whether you're capturing it or keeping it from hitting the inside of the home. Just that kind of thing. I was like, this seems like a fatal flaw to me. Like, we should be discussing this, particularly in homes that are going to be having the sun hit it from 360 degrees.
Yeah. Oh, and also particularly in the think that this is what the bulk of the population is going to live in, is going to be one of these homes. I have
most homes.
Yeah, this is most homes. I have this massive thorn in my side over this whole thing as well. Like, and it starts even back before the architecture. It starts back with the planning. How many streets can face north, south, or face east, west? Like, what is the orientations going to be, and what sizes will those blocks be? Like, long, thin blocks might be great for certain orientation, but shocking for other orientation. So the first point that I look at is I go, who's taking care of this from a planning department? So the developer can turn up with whatever they wish. Whether that gets passed or not is a whole nother story. So the people that we have, city architects, every city has an architectural department. So when that planning permission is going to be granted for this subdivision or this, development, who in that part is looking at the orientation of how these houses will be built? No one.
Yeah.
The only thing they're looking at doing is the developers looking at maximizing the number of blocks for sale with and the amount of infrastructure. So, this is a real bugbear of mine. It's a hobby horse. So number one, are flawed from the start because of the layouts. So, and then there's this thing of just bulldoze most things to being flat so that you can start with a flat slab that's going to be, or a flat base. So that's going to be the first way we build. And probably from that point of view, that's going to be the most economic. So you can take whatever that land is, completely destroy it, rip all the topsoil off it, shape it, laser grade it, do all those things, and then put it back, put retaining walls in, and then put it back together with that topsoil back on top of it. But you're going to remove all the trees, you're going to remove any habitat, you're going to destroy anything that's on it to start with.
Yeah, I was working on a hospital project about 10 years ago, and I almost cried when I learned about this. I had joined the project right after this happened. So they purchased a neighborhood of about 50 homes, some of which were perhaps 100 years old, and all these mature trees, very tall, 50, 60-year-old trees. They bulldozed all of it and built parking lot.
Wow.
Just flat parking lot. Like, and you go to this hospital today, and it's just this sea of tarmac. Like, you could land airplanes on this. Like, it's that large.
Wow.
And I'm like,
Wow.
oh, did we really need to do that? Couldn't
Yeah.
we have spent maybe a little bit more money and used 20% of the land and built a parking structure
Yeah.
that was, 3, 4, 5 stories high and got the same number of spaces?
Yeah.
And also now all those spaces are shaded, which is
Yeah.
nice.
So I was about to say, and orientation wise, you've also maintained you've got this big bit of land. Orientation wise, you've got them stacked as opposed to, and that means they're closer to wherever they're going to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm with you, man. This to me is like a hobby horse. As I say, I've just done, it's going to be on in the US in a couple of weeks. So this will come out after it. I just did a talk for a first generation homeowners group or symposium. And in the talk, it's one of my biggest things. So we could, I don't know how we would though, can't change the developer. These people are going to go looking for a house that already exists. They're going to be looking for bang for buck out of,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and we've got this whole huge piece of the market that's driven by the ego and the trend of what it looks like. So the visual impact from the street, our facade.
Yes.
No thought to how it will live whatsoever. There is when somebody designs it, they go, well, this has got this not orientation. This has got this circulation inside, these stairs here, this here, put together that way. But whether
it's all very internally focused.
Yeah. But then,
there's no discussion around what it means for the city as a whole. So I was walking my dogs just the other day with my wife and a friend of ours, and we walked past this small development that someone had done just a few years ago, and my friend remarked on it. I was like, "Oh, this is really nice," and I'm like, "Well, it's nice in some ways. Like the homes are beautiful, but what had happened is, yeah, they look pretty. What had happened is the developer had got a hold of an old horse property. So in this part of town where I live, it's been built out for many decades. And the town planning was originally like, 2-acre horse plots or maybe 1.5 acres. And so, people pass away or they move out, whatever. And a developer will get a hold of one of these horse properties, right? And so it has street frontage on one side, but then it's like long and thin and stretches back into the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so what they do is they build one road down
the middle.
Side, and then they put 5 houses on one side.
Yeah.
And that's it. They're done. And I'm like, that's not how you build neighborhoods. Like, this is important for the kind of densification of a built out area and creating, it was one house, now it's 5 houses, so more people can live there, and that's good. But there's no connectivity as a whole. There's no pedestrian permeability, right? There's fence on 3 sides. So if you walk down the street, you just got to walk back out.
Yeah.
So it's very isolated. And there are a lot of those little islands around me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is what I see as well. This is what I see all the time. I in my talk that I created for these guys, I very much, it's a pre-recorded one, very much talk to them about, so you're buying your first home. So first of all, I gave them an idea of how to create their wish list of what they would, just like, you have clients who come to you for a custom home.
Mm-hmm.
How do you direct them? You take me through that process and then go, how would that relate to somebody who's buying what do you call them? A production home. We call them production homes.
Home.
We call them project homes, but production home.
Project homes.
So, so give me the same, if you were telling somebody who's going to buy a project home, how to utilize the tools that you use to get the best for a custom home project that you would be telling them. Take me through.
Well, so ideally they're coming to me before they've bought land.
Yeah.
That's an ideal scenario, right? Like, I want to work with them and their realtor and maybe the landscape architect, and we all get together and we figure out, what do you want from your home? Let's find the land that fits that vision, right? Because if they come to you and they've already got the piece of land, like, so many decisions have already been made and you've already been put into a corner in many ways. So I had someone come to me 6 months ago. We didn't end up moving forward together on this one, but they had found this home in a fully built out development. This is an investment opportunity for them. And they wanted to buy this home, bulldoze it. It was a beautiful home. And then build a new, much larger home and then sell it at, they had a profit in mind that I do think was quite reasonable. But I was like, I don't know that we can build a home of that square footage at a quality that I'm happy with. So we parted ways based on that. But there were a number of problems just with the site that I wanted to point out to them. I'm like, you want to sell this home for, they wanted to sell for $5 million. I mean, it's in a private gated development. This gated development has two entrances, kind of at one end of a road that winds through the middle of the development. This home was right near one of the entrances on that main road. Okay. And so I'm like, someone who's buying a $5 million home in a neighborhood of $1 to $2 million homes.
Right. So they're buying the premium property within that neighborhood.
A premium property with a neighborhood, but they're right near the entrance, and there are like 500 or more homes in here. So they're going to have many hundreds of cars passing by their front door every day.
Thousands of transactions going by. Yeah.
And is that an experience that someone who buys a $5 million home will find acceptable? And in my mind, the answer is no. And so, I would have directed them, don't buy this land, buy a different site. Let's work together to find one that actually fits the $5 million home vision. Because I don't think this one does.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I find that part fascinating because, as you say, like horses for courses, where's the right piece of land for that value of property? How did they go? Did they obviously employed somebody to do it? They already owned the piece of land.
Yeah, I haven't talked to them since, so I'm not sure what's going on.
It'd be fascinating to know how they went.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I had a discussion with the investor, their builder, and me where we were talking about these things. And even their builder, when they heard kind of the budget they had for the actual build, was surprised how low it was. And I'm like, you might be able to build something at that price, but it's not going to be high quality. It's going to be builder grade. Like it might be 10,000 square feet and it might look really pretty, but you're not going to have any ability within that budget to look at sustainability. We're not going to be able to work on, a high degree of air infiltration or, high premium windows. Any of those sorts of things are just out the window. They can't even discuss them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you're trying to build something so large at such a small budget. Like it just doesn't work. Just build a smaller home and some of that money on better windows and think about, some sustainability options.
Yeah.
And I'm not even saying that every home needs to follow something as stringent as like passive house, but there's a middle ground there where we can do a lot of work at a minimum amount of cost and build a much better home.
So this takes me back to, so you go back to that thing of, so the first thing that you'd say to anybody would be their site selection and understanding enough to make the right site selection. So somebody's going to buy a production home. If they were buying it in your area, what would you say with site selection? What orientation would you suggest they would want best? And then what would they want from, the what do you call it? Like the front orientation of the home. What size would they want? Like what width block would it be that they would put it on? Because this is the thing that I look at with, if you were to have it a long, thin block that runs back in, then you're going to have a neighbor on either side that's going to be long and thin as well. So you're going to have two primary facades that are going to be suited. One's going to be the backyard and one's going to be the front yard. Most people are going to build, most development companies are going to build as close to the road frontage as they're allowed. And so they'll create a backyard. And their reason for that is the cost of the driveway, the cost of the landscape. They minimize that, and then they put the house on. They maximize what they can do with the house. They'll take it out to the sides of the block usually as well, so that they've got less cost on landscaping. And then they'll leave an empty piece at the back. And where you live in Utah, what would you be suggesting to people to look at from that point of view? Because this is no different really than if you're suggesting it to someone who's got $5 million to build a house. It's the same knowledge that we share.
Yeah. I would say it depends on their priorities, right? So I have some people who come to me and they're looking to build their second, third, fourth home as a ski retreat in some of the resort areas up in the high mountains. And in those cases, many times you're looking for isolation, seclusion. Sometimes there's priority on ski in, ski out, right? Because they're right on a ski slope of some kind. And then capturing views, right? If they're in an elevated place, they want to really capture. some beautiful mountain vistas, and there are some just spectacular places.
Yeah.
It makes my jaw drop every time I go hiking, which I love to do all summer long. And so those can be some really inspiring designs. But if you, as a counterpoint, look at someone who they're building their primary home, they're going to build it in the middle of the metro area, where all of the streets are fully built out, the infrastructure is there, and you're going to pick a site that is, there are good schools nearby. Maybe it's low crime. You're kind of a distant between workplaces for the wife and the husband. So those things become very real concerns, and that can drive a lot of what the site selection is, at least in choosing neighborhoods. And then within neighborhoods, I think there are advantages and disadvantages to having like a south-facing home or a north-facing home. One of my current clients put a high degree of priority on getting Eastern light into the master bedroom to help them wake up in the morning, right? So that was a huge part of the discussion. Things like art studios, I like to have north-facing windows, so you never have direct light coming in and hitting the piece that they're working on. It's all that diffuse light that's kind of reflected off the particles in the atmosphere back into the window from the north side. And then for south-facing, since this environment gets quite hot in the summer, we try and limit the amount of sunlight that actually hits the window on the south in the summertime, but then maximize it in the winter.
Yeah, right. So those things, if you broke those down into those steps, if you're looking for whatever it is, whether it's your big custom home or your, custom residence, I think that point you made about the house being sort of like of its purpose, what do you want it for? If it's a ski house, it's not like you need a drying room, say, but you don't necessarily need masses of closet space because it's short in, out, it's not there. It's not your primary home where you've got that, or other globe space, other things like that. And then the orientation again of being able to ski into the home. Essentially, how close can I get to that back door or whatever it is, and what do I transition through? That house would be useless in a town environment. It wouldn't be suitable. So getting this kind of lifestyle of how you live and what your expectation of it is for the home, and then marrying that to the property is really important. And I think that's part that I was saying. And my thing as well was very much, who are you and how do you live? Well, you made the point, Eastern light in the morning. And what are your habits? How do you like that? Or are you somebody who goes to bed at 1 a.m. and actually wants to sleep late? So we need to put you on the western side so that you don't get any, or on the northern side where you are, where there is no direct light. Do we tuck you over somewhere there? And then you're in a zone that can get really hot. So then your western light can be, your south and western light can be really baking. And what does that mean for it? So giving them those sort of insights that as an architect you work with all the time, doesn't matter what level of things people are looking at. If they're looking to buy something that you're going to help them renovate, it's the same things. It's like, whoa, hold on a second. Can this do this? Will this do this well? Because the one, 30 doors down and facing this way, that would be a much better home to do what you want to, if it was a renovation. This getting in early. And again, it's like a bit like you said at the start with the, have they got the electrical contractors at the design stage? Is everybody in the line talking? Those pieces are really fundamental to this same thing, but you're just starting back before you even make your purchase. The real estate agent is never going to know it or be responsible for it. It comes down to the people who actually know it and understand it. And that is our building designing community of architects, building designers. They're going to be the people who actually look at this and study this. And then we go back to what you learned at Oxford Brookes with this whole layering of this. To create better homes that create better lives, humans that create a better planet.
Yes, indeed.
I think it's this thing of being able to at least help people with what there is available to make better decisions. And it doesn't, it doesn't change whether you're doing the multi-million-dollar project here or whether you're doing the project down here. Tell me about the different landscapes that you get to work in, because I know Utah pretty well.
Yeah.
I've skied there quite a bit. And
Hmm.
before we were talking, and we were running through our ski fields, and I said
Hmm.
Sundance, and you were saying that you designed a building in Sundance for those of you who don't know Sundance, it was a dream founded by Robert Redford, and sort of like hits the face of it. I mean, there's multiple investors in Sundance, but it's
Yeah.
fabulous ski field. And take me through, working in these resort areas and mountain homes and
Hmm.
stuff like that, because you've got a lot of that. And then we can talk about what's on the flat.
Sure. Sure. So that project we did for Robert Redford, I was working for a small firm at the time. I was pretty early in my career. So I was not, super involved in the design side of things. Again, I was, very technical, right? But that was an exciting project, and I like to bring that one up just as a, you know, here's a name for someone who I worked with.
Yeah.
And I've gotten the opportunity to visit that building in some past years, and I think it turned out really, really well. But beyond that, in more recent work, I've been working on last couple of years, I did some very high-end custom homes, kind of $1,000 per square foot, um,
Uh-huh.
in those mountainside ski and ski out areas.
Nice.
Yeah, just fabulous stuff, very engaging projects, super fun to work on, and a lot of learning as well, right? So when you're dealing with this high slope, and talking to the contractor about how they're going to stage things so they can build the home, that becomes a very interesting conversation. Capturing views is a very high priority, obviously. But then dealing with, what materials you're going to put in so that it can tie back into the mountainside that it's rising out of. And that's a very much in a feel sense. How is the
Mhm.
home going to feel like it's part of this mountain? And then there's a variety of different styles people are looking for. Mountain modern is kind of common out here, I would say, which is a beautiful style. Beyond that, since these homes for many of the clients are second, third, fourth homes, there's a lot of discussion around, how can we lock the home down while we're away? And that does lead to some different design considerations. Things like having lockable storage, so that they're renting the home out on Airbnb when they're not there, they have a space where they can put things where they know it won't be tampered with.
Yep.
As you mentioned, maybe closets are smaller. Maybe some spaces don't need them. Do you need a pantry in the kitchen? Maybe not, right?
Mhm.
If you're not there, you just buy a little bit of food for the time you're there, but there's no long-term food storage, because that becomes a liability
Yeah.
if you're not
Yeah.
out there for months and there's food sitting there potentially spoiling or attracting pests.
Yeah. Right.
So discussions like that, and then discussions around smart home technology. How can we monitor the home when you're
Mhm.
multiple states away or even in a different country? So cameras and detection equipment of different kinds. Water leak detection is a big one. If you have a leak in the home, you want to be notified instantly and not find out 2 months later when you show up to go skiing.
Then it's an iceberg. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Then you've got big problems. Dealing with the heavy snow is another huge design consideration. On these homes, we had pretty intense discussions, we'll say, around, do we even put gutters on?
Yeah.
Because when you have this large buildup of snow on the roof and it begins sliding, some people were commenting that, well, anytime you install gutters on these homes, they're temporary gutters only, because that snow slides off one time and it just tears it right off.
Yeah. Right.
So instead, you're trying to prioritize, when we have the steeper pitched roof, where is that snow going to fall, making sure that there are not pedestrian walkways right underneath that area so they can fall safely, and using a lot of snow melt systems in different places of the roof to protect the home.
So
So
did you
valleys,
say?
gutters,
Oh,
drains.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Snow melt systems, you called it. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and many of these are literally just a cable that gets plugged in, and this cable it has resistance to the electricity running through it, so it just warms up,
Yep.
and that keeps the drain clear of ice.
Yep. Yep. Wait, what about with internal heating and stuff in these homes? Um,
Yeah.
and insulation, like, so getting more into the sustainability conversation of what you're putting into the structure to make a home work when it's in the mountains like that.
Yeah, so these homes had, I think, more glazing than you would want to see in a very sustainable home, right? There were some areas of glass that were, 11 feet tall and 30 feet wide.
Hmm.
Spectacular, which creates a spectacular space. But one of the things many owners don't understand is that we can insulate a wall, can't insulate a window, right? Which everyone understands that.
Yeah.
But the window, even really, really good windows, only have an insulation property of something like R5,
Yeah.
where your wall, even a very basic code minimum wall, is going to be like an R19.
Yeah.
And we're frequently building walls, especially particularly in those areas, R30 or so.
Right.
So if I try to have conversations with my clients about prioritizing which views you want to see, discussing, what does privacy mean in all these different spaces? If you just have an entire wall of glass, you're now exposed to the outside. And if no one can see maybe that face of the house, maybe that's fine. And maybe that's what they prioritize.
Yeah.
But it's a discussion, and I think it's an important one to have.
Oh, sorry, go.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, since there is such a large amount of glazing, talking about spending good money in the budget to get really high quality windows.
Sure. I was going to say you'd be into triple glazed and obviously thermally broken frames and all these kinds of different pieces that, as you say, still don't necessarily shift your R values. They do a lot from single pane of window.
Yeah, it definitely helps.
Yeah. And but still, compared to what you can do with a wall, you're streets ahead with what you can do with a wall. One of the things I notice, I think a lot of architecture, you said mountain modern, a lot of architecture is homogenized because of our ability to see so much so easily these days with the internet, and certainly with the use of things like Instagram and Pinterest and stuff. We can see the latest of somebody's work in a heartbeat. And it could be in Utah or it could be in Australia. And then you go, okay, well, wow, I love that. Clients will come and they go, I really love this. And you'll go, yeah, well, it's fit for there, but it's not fit for here for these reasons, but I really love that, do they just keep going around until they find somebody who says, yeah, well, I'll do it for you. And then obviously, that part of it happens. And then it doesn't mean that they necessarily get the house that will live well on that site. And, like you're saying, with the large pieces of glazing, sometimes I think that depending on what the project is, because we'll certainly do plenty with large glazing as well, is where are your viewpoints? Act like a photographer. Think like a photographer. How do I make a picture out of this? What's the important part? Not necessarily all of it. The simple thing is, we'll just look at everything. Then we miss the nuances within everything that make it the most magical piece.
Yeah. I think one element of really high quality design is restraint.
Mm-hmm.
You can create entire faces of glass, or as you say, you can create a picture frame that is a spectacular wow moment and still maintain the comfort and sustainability ideals of what you're trying to create.
I think it's like FOMO. It is so FOMO, it's so fear of missing out by not having, with restraint. It's like, it's like a smorgasbord as opposed to a meal that's been designed for you. And the meal that's been designed for you, if well designed, will be well thought out for every moment, each moment, every season, and then every moment within those seasons, so that you'll see this will be what the light will do in the mornings. This is what it will do in the afternoons. This is what it will do in the evenings. And
exactly, following your analogy, a design experience should be digestible, right? Yeah. When the meal is too large and you walk away feeling heavy or laid down and sleepy, that's not really a good meal design either.
Yeah. That's a great analogy. I like that. I run these architectural tours and the food and architecture mixed. I'm going to steal that. Thank you.
That was yours. I stole it from you.
Well, digestible was the word, because it is. It's like, if you can do that, I think that so much building is just bloated. Mm-hmm. It's like you were saying about that house earlier. They want to sell it for $5 million. They want to build it for probably $1 million. That's probably not realistic, but let's just say they want to, whatever the dollars and things are in there, and then they bloat it for size, and it being bloated for size, it loses quality of finishes. Those windows aren't as good as they could be. The house doesn't perform well. all those things shift. But we got big. We got big.
Yeah,
You know, a big,
we
big.
got big. It looks good in pictures,
Yeah, big's beautiful.
but is really uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly. We can't
You'll never
live
want to
in
sit
all
next
of
to
it.
a window.
I think that's so true. So talk to me about, because with those, again, stay in the mountains, with that sustainability part of it, because
Yeah,
you're dealing with heat at some points, and you're dealing with cold and extreme cold at other points. And I know Utah,
yeah.
it can be extreme hot and extreme cold. So you've got both these things happening. Talk to me
Hmm.
about when you looking at the sustainability part of a home, what
Yeah.
how you approach that.
So this is something that I found actually quite difficult to understand and do research on throughout my career. Um, because when you learn about sustainability principles, they're frequently tailored toward, oh, well, you do this for a hot environment and you do this for a cold environment. Even talking about the structure of a wall, where do you put your vapor barriers? Like we put it on the warm side of the insulation. And I'm like, well, that's different in one season versus the other. So what do you do?
Yeah.
And we have answers for that building science stuff. But going back to how do you design a home for a temperate environment, I became very interested in pursuing some study in vernacular architecture, right? And for our listeners who may not have heard that term before, vernacular is architecture without architects, right? Looking at the traditions of peoples who have been building things in an area for thousands of years, because the designs that they repeat over and over have lessons built into them, which we can learn to appreciate and then express through our designs. Now, here in Utah, northern Utah in particular, our native populations were quite nomadic, right? They followed herds around through the mountains. And so many of their structures were very temporary in nature. And so I was thinking about, vernacular in the context of colonialism, which, is going to apply to your area, right, in Australia and our area here. So sometime in the 1850s, Utah was very sparsely populated, but then you had a huge influx of settlers that came in, many of them of English descent.
Yeah.
So what they brought with them was a building tradition. And some of them, they'd been living in perhaps the New England area for a couple hundred years. But that area is going to be far more similar to England than it is to Utah. And so they would come in and they built what they knew. Some of it worked, some of it didn't.
They learned some lessons.
Yeah, they learned some lessons, maybe the hard way. And so you have about a 100-year period between when the area was colonized with a significant population that started building permanent structures and when mechanical ventilation in the 1950s became prevalent.
Right.
And so I was looking at that going, okay, there might be limited things we can learn there, but are there sister cities across the world that we could look to who have a very similar climate, where those peoples did build permanent structures? And so that's kind of been central to my focus. And I don't want to say that these colonial societies didn't learn anything. There's a style of building in kind of Louisiana, kind of the southeast of the United States, which is very warm and high humidity.
Yep.
But they have these what they call shotgun homes,
Yep.
which are very long and thin. The front profile of the home is very small, and then the back profile is also very small. And so they would have a lot of windows and the door on the front of the house and the same on the back, and they would open both of them, which would encourage airflow through the center of the home, keeping the whole thing nice and cool and also keeping the humidity down, right?
Yep.
So that was something that came from, learning in the colonial era for them.
Yep.
But we just didn't have the same thing here. So I was curious if you're familiar, with the Aboriginal people in Australia there, and, are they quite nomadic as well, or do you see a lot of building from them?
No, they were hugely nomadic. They didn't build as such. They didn't build permanent structures. Again, we had our colonials here in Australia. I'm a Kiwi, but I live in Australia, so I'm a New Zealander, and similar development there. Although only really a couple of parts of New Zealand have the same climate as Australia. And those are sort of like, some maybe South Australia, parts of that. And obviously Tasmania. Tasmania might as well be New Zealand for its climate. It's very, very similar.
Okay.
And you've got one which has got the landmass the size of the United States, and you've got the other one that's like the size of California or smaller, and ocean all around it. So very interesting to look at the differences, and they built the same stuff. So
Hmm.
the the Victorian English kind of era was when most of this, pre-Victorian, but like that's when it was populated, and
Hmm.
but our massive building sort of thing came in that early Victorian era, and with it in Queensland. So Queensland, where I live, is a bit like Florida, so it's hot and humid, and doesn't where I live doesn't have the big storms, so you don't get your hurricanes and stuff. But go north, we get cyclones, hurricanes, all those kinds of things up there.
Right.
They're just different names for similar things. So we have those up there. They build, the old Queenslander was like a Victorian timber home that was on stumps, so off the ground, airflow, water
Hmm.
flow underneath, so that it could
Yep.
breathe. It would be a single skin of board, because remember, heat's the problem, not the cool.
Right.
So you're not trying to protect yourself from the cold. So they would build them with a single skin, and often with the framing would be exposed to the outside, a bit like the
And
Pompidou
maybe you can
Centre.
see through gaps between each
Yeah.
plank, right?
And exactly. And that meant that you got wind flow through them as well. They also
Hmm.
shotgunned them, where they'd have a door at the front, a door at the back, and let
Yep.
the air run through. And then they would have verandas around the outsides of them, sort of a bit like you would in the South in America, where it would have some sort of
Hmm.
veranda to protect you from the sun, but then give you an open outdoor area. People didn't kind of go and live on the back deck or in the back patio. They stayed closer to the home, and they
Hmm.
didn't build these big expansive outdoor areas that we do now. So they would live in these verandaed spaces, and eventually they would get closed in and become more rooms. So their
Yeah.
veranda would get closed in, and then you would have the central core of the house just dark, just pitch black, and then no light.
Yep.
But yeah, really interesting with the way that the original ones, the airflow was designed, even from the cyclonic spaces and down into where we are down here in southern Queensland. That is very much a vernacular that happened and still does to some degree. We call it our Queenslander style. And then there's a modern take on that as well, which is a bit like you saying mountain modern. It's got a lot more glass. It's got a lot more thought to that. One of the things that we see with subdivisions, development subdivisions, is even if there is no like project home or production home builders going in and working in there,
Yep.
is that people are trying to build so close to their boundaries that they've got very few overhangs on their roofs, and
Hmm.
that again is a exposing it to heat, exposing it to sun, to water, exposing it to wind, and it's meaning that the house has got very little protection out to the side. So there's very little cool
Yeah.
corridors between houses.
Hmm.
When we have that space and we have overhang, we create cool and we create airflow between houses. When we build hard up like this and no eaves on the house, we
Hmm.
change those corridors of how wind flows and stuff. So again, this whole thing of site specific to site is really
Yeah.
important. Yeah.
Very important.
And that thing where we look at, the past to inform the future is really interesting. Like obviously we have fire regulations and stuff, and a lot of the past
Hmm.
things were built too close. So when one burnt, the next one burnt. And whether it's built out of, brick or mortar or whatever versus whether it's built out of timber, what's the prevalent materials of the space of the area? How far are we trucking
Hmm.
things? Those kind of things have gone. And we'll send a cinder block from Queensland to Victoria to have it polished to send it back again. It's like crazy town, but that's what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, that is what happens. I went to a presentation just a couple weeks ago from a manufacturer that flew in from Hokkaido, Japan, to show off their yakisugi
Yeah.
or soshugiban burnt wood product. Beautiful product. And I think I really appreciated like their whole process and how they manage their forest, etc. But I'm like, I don't really want to ship material from the other side of the world. Like, there's got to be someone more local who can burn a piece of wood for me, you know?
There is.
They had a very specific process, right? They put their wood through a kiln,
Yeah.
so it's treated on all sides, where
Wow.
many producers are only doing one side. So you'll get the look of
Yeah.
yakisugi, but not really the protection and the longevity.
Yeah.
So they had a strong
So they were
of,
charred on all sides.
only one side had heavy charring in
Yeah.
the ones they showed us.
The other sides had also been heated.
Yeah, they've been heat treated.
Yeah. Okay.
So they were saying that it's a 100-year product,
Yeah.
a beautiful product. I got samples sitting on my desk right now. It's great stuff.
Yeah, I have some lying around in my studio as well. I love what it does, and I love the bug resistance, weather resistance, all those things that charcoal can create.
Yeah, the sort of maintenance-free idea where
Yeah.
You can seal it if you want to, or just don't, and then let it kind of develop this patina over a number of years and kind of gray out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, great product. But I also wanted to bring up, as I was looking for sister cities for like my climate here, particularly for Park City, because Park City and Salt Lake are actually a fair bit different, even though they're still close together because of the elevation change.
Right.
Hokkaido is actually a really good parallel for climate between Park City. And so I have a client right now, actually, who we're designing a home with some Japanese inspiration and pulling a lot of learning from traditional Japanese design to try and create a more sustainable home.
Yeah, right. That's so cool. So I like that.
Yeah, so that's an exciting one. It's great when my research dovetails into some design work kind of directly.
Oh, you get to play with it, and you get to be able to observe what's happened in another space with a very similar climate, and then go, oh, okay, here's the learnings from that. I think that's always really fascinating. I do a lot the same with touring and traveling, is go to spaces that have, or places that have, a climate zone that's similar to different parts of Australia, and go, okay, well, we have a project, say, in Victoria, then what do we need to learn from, where's their climate zones around, say, America, Canada, other parts of Australia. Let's have a look at those and do our research there, just to understand what has worked in those other climate zones, see if there's anything interesting, as well as what's working in the climate zone they're in. Yeah, I think this leads to more sustainable design.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, there's so many lessons to be learned. I love the fact that the Hokkaido piece and Park City, and what are those influences? And sure, they've got cultural influences overlaid as well, but then just building influences is something that you can take on. That's fun. It's really fun. With design, what's your ideal client? What are they like? What's an ideal client for you like? Is it somebody who's really local? What happens with it?
I enjoy working with local people, but I also really enjoy working on those people who come in and want to build their second, third home. Those resort properties give me such a fun challenge and an opportunity to create something that not only meets all of their requirements, but ends up being a spectacular monument to high quality design. Ideally, they have an interest in sustainability. Not all clients do. But in either case, we can talk to them about, how some of the sustainable practices that we implement within our practice lead to a more comfortable home that's going to, last for generations.
I always thought with that, you bake it in regardless. It may not be at the forefront of the conversation, but it's baked. It's part of the pie.
Exactly. Yeah. So that ideal client is just someone who's interested in high quality design. And, if we can share an interest and a passion for skiing, that's always appreciated too.
Yeah, I think that's a nice thing, something where there's those common touch points. And when you especially say it's a mountain home like that, if they're a hiker or if they're a skier or if they're one of those, you being familiar with what they do and how they do it gives you the insight, and you create a common conversation that accelerates understanding of it. And both of you will have always, or both parties have always looked for solutions to common problems that those environments bring up. And I think that's always a really interesting part of, the discussion as well. Like designing in spaces that maybe have high winds, what do you do that's different? How do you enter your property? How do you leave your property?
Yeah.
we've got a project that we're doing at the moment, and there is when it's windy in this particular spot, and it's not always windy. It's also rainy when it's windy, just about always, and it will come as driving rain. And
so the water is coming from the side instead of from above.
absolutely. And the way our garage will be oriented, our garage doors will be, or door will be somewhat subject to this. And then also our side door from the outside into the garage, side entrance. If I put it on one side of the building, it's going to do one thing. If I put it on the other side, it's going to do the other thing, especially in the adverse weather. And then instead of having one big, large single garage door, we're actually going back to multiple doors, for the reason being that we don't need to open, I'm going to do it in metric, but 6 meters of space by, 2.6 meters of space. We don't need to open all of that every time. Especially when we're going to have it, sometimes we're going to have this massive wind flow and driving rain and all the rest, and we can't really change the orientation of it. It's because of the orientation of the block of land, so we don't have space to bring it another way. So it's like, how do you get the best out of it? How do you get the best out of this? And, counterproductively, you'd think we're putting in multiple garage doors instead of a single garage door. But it is going to make the house live so much easier for these. There's a wind that's always going to come from this direction. It's the prevailing breeze. But when it gets nasty, it becomes the dominant wind and brings a whole lot of stuff with it. Hey, do you want to share some pictures for our YouTube watchers? Do you want to share some pictures?
Yeah, I had a few. We've already talked about some of these. So
yeah, cool. Share some.
Yeah.
And then just talk us through them.
Really quick.
Yeah, I'm always excited to see work, and most people are as well.
Yeah, so I'm actually sharing today some of the vernacular architecture that we were talking about.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, since my firm is new, I don't have a lot of work to show. I've got a couple things on my website, and then this one on the boards currently, which is inspired by Japanese design, but I don't have any renderings yet, unfortunately.
Okay, that's cool.
So, talking about the vernacular, this is a baobab tree. Right. Kind of common to Africa. And I think, are they also in Australia? You have them there as well?
Got a funny feeling we do, but I've never seen one like that here. I've seen those in Africa, though.
Right. And so, that's one that can be turned into a home, right? And so there's some element of vernacular design where you're looking at it going, well, they had an opportunity because of their local flora and fauna, or perhaps rock formations, whatever, and they took advantage of it, right? Which is very interesting. But then here's another, a pueblo, not located super far from me, far enough that, it's a completely different climate. But they just took advantage of this massive rock overhang. And so that works in very much the same way as a roof overhang, where in the winter, they get a lot of sunlight into their spaces down below, but in the summer, that rock overhang is blocking all that sunlight from hitting up and heating up their homes here.
I wonder what happens with wind flow in that, like where you've got this. Is that in Arizona or is it in New Mexico?
I think it's the Four Corners area. I do think it's New Mexico.
Right. Yeah, and I wonder what happens, where you're tucked under that big cliff, like in a cave, and then I wonder how the wind flows through there, because it will have a way that it works. I mean, it got scooped out by something at some point as well.
Right.
The rock.
Usually water flow. So there's a bunch of canyons down there, carved through the mesas and the plateaus that leave these massive canyons. And so a lot of times the wind will come down the canyon. And so the wind is going to be coming across the face of all those buildings.
Yep.
Which is not ideal, right? When you're talking about, like, if we go back to the earlier discussion about shotgun houses.
Yeah.
There's an example of shotgun houses. These you can orient to the wind and get the wind to carry right through the house and cool it down.
Yeah.
But, in that, if you're living in that pueblo, you are dealing with a very dry heat. So as long as you're in the shade and the sun has not been hitting the side of your home, it's going to be relatively comfortable.
True. In Texas, they talk a lot about their dog trot houses, where this is shotgun. They have
Hmm.
dog trots in Texas where you kind of have the central space between two pavilions, all under the same roof. And that central space between two pavilions is
Hmm. Yeah, I've
where
seen those.
where the dogs would sleep, where the dogs would
Right.
be. And you'd sit out there like in a big covered veranda and the air would run through underneath. Um, and you'd be protected from either side of the building from the
Hmm.
heat. Yeah. I love
Exactly.
this is very much this. I was about to say this picture you've got here is very much the Victorian sort of style that you would see that reproduced here in Australia as well, especially in the down south.
Exactly. I was very curious if some of the architecture we see that's 100 to 150 years old between your area and mine are like
Mhm,
very much the same. So
mhm,
this is an example of a home. I think it's built in 1875
uh-huh.
out of stone block, and it's less than 100 miles from where I am now in a place called Ephraim, Utah. And you see this kind of thing all over the state, right? And so they brought with them their building tradition. I think this is an example that is relatively successful in the climate because of that mass stone wall.
Okay.
So even in the summer when the sun is beating down on these walls, the openings are relatively small,
Uh-huh.
right? So you're not getting as much sunlight coming in and heating up your interior space. The sun is going to hit the exterior face of that wall. It's warming up the stone, right? And it warms it throughout the day.
So you end up with a
Um,
mass. Yeah.
you end up with a mass, but then at night, when it's cooler outside, the heat within that stone is then going to exit to the exterior, right? Because the heat's just going to move into whichever is the colder
Yeah.
direction,
The coldest space.
right?
Yeah.
The coldest space. And so if that block is thick enough, then
Yeah.
the heat from the sun will not get to your interior space before it has a chance to cool down in the evening.
Mhm.
So I think this is a more successful example. You could talk about, you could improve it by creating larger overhangs and shading all of these windows and different things like that to help out. Um, and you could also take advantage of the stack effect since it's 2 stories here.
Yeah.
And hopefully you're venting heat out the top as well
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Oh,
this
wow.
is one from Japan, from Hokkaido. So this is a reconstruction of a house built that would have been built by the Ainu people. And what I thought was really interesting with this is not only is it a thatched roof, which you see in a lot of areas of the world in the kind of ancient building traditions, but also thatched walls.
Yeah.
Not a fire resistant home by any means. But when there's heavy snow outside, you're not particularly worried about it. But very heavily insulated. They often had very small openings, if any openings at all, sometimes just the door. And then you can see in the top of the roof there was an opportunity for smoke to escape. So one of the things I think that you worry about in a home like this is pest control.
Yeah.
Um, but if you have your main heating source and cooking space in the center of a single room like that, then the smoke is going up. It's infiltrating through all of your thatch and keeping it pest free. So
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
still a really good building typology, even
Uh-huh.
if you don't see it in modern houses.
Yeah. And the other thing of having the kind of that roof opening on either end, as you say, to let the smoke through, it also lets air circulate through. So any of the window
Yep.
spaces, it will be dragging it up and through at the same time.
Yeah, and that's going to help keep the home cooler in the summer when it actually is warm outside.
Yeah. Yeah. God, I've never seen one with thatched walls like that before. That's awesome.
I hadn't either.
That's,
So this is in a heritage museum, I think. Oh, I forget now where that was, but
yeah. Yeah, that's so cool. So cool.
yeah.
I think there's so much to be, as say, learnt from the past with how they dealt with things and what that's meant and what they've got from it and how it creates a better home for the future. And
Yeah.
I always, if I'm doing a farmhouse somewhere for somebody, it's on land and maybe they're not from the district or they've moved there from somewhere else, I always go and look for a couple of old farmers to talk to and understand what the seasons are going to be like. So what is this going to be like now? I know we're today, but every 8 years we get a big storm. We get this thing that comes through. 8 years? Yeah, 8 years. Yeah, we're due for it next year. Or look back 2 years ago. Remember, like it was on the news. We had all this da-da-da-da-da that happened. Yeah, that's the 8 year cycle. Oh, right. Okay. What happens then? Well, this is what happens, right? So, yeah, you want to build to that. You want to know that's coming. And it's local. It's local. And farmers are used
Yeah.
to learning to survive and thrive on land. And so they're very much in touch with the full environment, what will happen and how it will happen. So getting a conversation with somebody who's been around the land for a long time, they get the seasons, they get the slowness of it, they get that. And then they won't tell you anything unless you ask them. They're usually people of a few words. They're not an open book, but you get,
I'm sure they had a lot to say about the prevailing wind direction, right?
oh yeah, prevailing wind, those storms, flooding, even what kind of birds and stuff you'll get, where they like to nest, what will happen with that, the troops of kangaroos that are around, just all these different things that are part of the landscape, leaving one of our planning things here is koala corridors, and koala areas and, the habitats. So our habitat corridors that we leave or create or nurture on property can be really interesting conversations. And, how these animals migrate around on the land that we're putting houses on, and how do we maintain enough of their habitat and keep them safe to do it. Yeah, fascinating. So tell me, what's the next 10 years look like for you and your business?
The next 10 years, huh? Well, hopefully unprecedented growth and vast design opportunity. I currently work by myself, which I actually really enjoy. So I don't know in the next 10 years if I'm going to grow to the point where I have a dedicated team assisting me with different designs. I kind of do anticipate that. But I never want to see my firm grow particularly large. I think I want to keep it a pretty small boutique design firm, just working on the custom homes.
Yeah. And projects where?
Across northern Utah. We mentioned Park City a little bit, but there's a variety of other places which are just as beautiful but less expensive in terms of the land cost. Places like Morgan County, Eden, Mountain Green, down into Heber, etc.
Yeah, right.
A lot of beautiful places.
Yeah. So to stay kind of local in your space, and then keep your team tight. Currently, do you just work with contractors as your general thing? What you don't do, you have contractors that do?
Yeah. Contractors do all the actual building work, and we partner very closely with them throughout the build process, to ensure that they have access to kind of our base of knowledge that we gain throughout the design process. We know how the owners want to feel in different spaces. So when questions come up, we can help direct solutions that tailor to those goals.
Yeah, nice. When do you bring your builder into your general contractor into your process? Like at what point in your design process do you do that?
So frequently they do come in after design is complete, and we go through a competitive bidding process. But not always. Sometimes we get a contractor that comes in very early in the design. And so we can partner with them, particularly if you're looking at a home that's going to be built with sustainable practice. I think it's good to bring them in early so you can incorporate things that they've learned on the many homes that they've built into the design, and make sure that you're incorporating practices which are realistic to accomplish. Right. Sometimes we have design goals, which given the local labor market might not be quite realistic. Right. And so we do have to work within that constraint. So having them there in the room, I think, just keeps us grounded.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'd agree. I think that it makes a big difference, having your contractor understand what they're going to build and why they're going to build it, and then let them help inform the design from a knowledge point of view and also from a financial point of view, what the design's likely to need, have, want, require.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, budget's important, so they'll comment on that throughout the process. Yeah. And when the contractor is not involved during design, we do bring a cost estimator in to keep us pointed in the right direction with all of our design decisions.
Do you bring the cost estimator in early, or do you bring them in once you've kind of got through schematic?
Oh, very early. I like to have them have a conversation with the client even before we get signed, right? Even before there's a contract, say, hey, here's what they want to accomplish. Here's what their stated budget is. Are they realistic?
Right.
Okay. Right. And that's an important moment for people when they realize that it's going to cost more than they were hoping, perhaps. And I've had a few projects kind of be scuttled by that conversation, but it's good to be realistic before you go too far down the road of design.
I think that yeah, there's different tools and stuff. I've never put one in at that point. Not that I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Once we have
Well, I mean, just if to put things in a little bit of perspective, I was talking to this cost estimator recently. He told me we did 400 projects last year. I'm like, okay, I mean, I can do a certain number of projects in a year, but
not 400.
nowhere near 400.
Yeah.
And so if you want to talk to someone about cost, like he knows
Yeah.
how much things are going to cost. I can look at it and go, oh, well, my last home cost this much per square foot. And I remember that we did these certain things. But that's not a process or a decision based on really good data.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and they have the really good data.
Other than a production home builder, there wouldn't be very many builders that would have 400 homes to have data on either, and across multiples of styles. So he's a really valuable input to your design process. And certainly with that upfront piece of being able to go, well, it's this much per square foot, knowing that this kind of terrain equals this much per square foot, and these kind of finishes equal this much per square foot, and being able to just even those broad, back of a napkin envelope type conversations this is how far your money goes with that. And then being able to go, well, that's X number of square feet of house that we're going to have.
Yeah.
Then knowing that your room list isn't going to meet that or is going to meet it. I always think that if your budget is bigger than your dream, you probably need a bigger dream. Like that. I've never had a client whose budget is bigger than their dream. Their ability to spend money's been bigger than their dream, but their budget for the project. Do you know what I mean? Like people come with, there's a whole lot of markers that make it sensible. There's one is the neighborhood, the longevity of the home, how long they want it, what they want it for, all those things. Then there's the capitalization. Is it going to be worth, the example you gave earlier, a neighborhood with a whole lot of houses at $1 and $2 million, and then you're going to have a $5 million home there. Will it be will it be $2 million too much for that neighborhood to, for it to really work and to have this kind of conversation, understanding these pieces, and then what does it need to meet that $5 million point, but what would it need to meet, say, the $3 million point? What are these points in there? And I always go, what's the next best neighborhood and what does it cost to be in that one? So if I go the next better neighborhood, what would it cost to be in that neighborhood? And how far would my money go? Because there's my competition if I'm doing it to sell it, if I'm doing it to roll it over.
Yeah.
Which I don't do anymore. We don't do projects like that. I haven't done them for quite a few years. We just do projects for people who are going to live in them. That's kind of on my ideal client list.
That's the ideal. Yeah.
Yeah. They want them for now and for a long time, and they can see that piece of their future, and maybe they can even see their family's future utilizing the property as well.
Yeah. Well, it's easier for them to make a decision to put, the high quality 50-year roofing on instead of the inexpensive 20-year roofing. Yeah.
Those kind of things that make the difference for that longevity of the project. Yeah. Fascinating. So, Kory, one last question. Your favorite space in your own home, what is it? Like, why and how does it make you feel?
It's my office space where I'm sitting right now.
Yeah.
This is the best space in the home. And I think it has to do with, as many good spaces do, is the quality of natural light. I got a big bank of windows here on the side that streams in, and I get to watch, all the seasons through the window here.
Yeah, nice. And what does that make you feel? Give me an emotional word.
It's comfort.
Yeah, okay.
Comfort and balance.
And if you were designing yourself a new home, what would be the elements you'd be putting in to gain that? But not just in your office, but in other parts of the home.
Yeah. So for that, I think the question you have to answer is, what is the difference between daylighting a home and sunlighting a home?
Oh, okay.
Right. And for me, the difference is with daylighting, you are curating how light comes into the home instead of just putting windows everywhere, as many as you possibly can. You're being thoughtful about it, right? It goes back to our discussion earlier about, restraint, and, curating how those windows work and what views they capture. But the other side of that is curating how much sunlight is coming in. If you have too much sunlight coming into a space, you can get a lot of glare. It can be very harsh and it can overheat your space. And that's what sunlighting is.
Mm.
And so, for all the spaces in a home, I think you want to see really good daylighting and not sunlighting.
I think that's a lovely distinction and a really beautiful way you described it as well. I've heard the terms before, but I've never had it so succinctly put. And I love the fact when, you see innovative daylighting of a home, and especially when, you're bringing light in from above, not just from the side.
Mm-hmm.
And when you bring light in from above and how this affects your circadian rhythms and then how that affects, your biology and how you live. And that's about the daylighting as opposed to the sunlighting. Both happen, but yeah, that was great.
Both happen.
It was great. You certainly get to appreciate how architecture feels when you travel and visit and go in different places. And as an example of that, most clients want a home that's light and airy. Like there's that they may want spaces that are cave-like, but most clients want to feel the sense of expansiveness from their home. Whereas I don't think maybe 100 years ago they even thought about it that much. Maybe 200 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think they did,
Yeah, you look at something like Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright, and it does all those things from daylighting and sunlighting in that home. And that was 1930s. So I suppose we're close to 100 years. But you go look at most of the stuff that was built around that time, and it wasn't anywhere near as thoughtful. You can go 100 years before it, and it was, again, different. But nowadays, maybe because of density, I'm not sure why, but that daylighting and bringing light in and the way we live is far more insulated in the sense of, we may work in offices, we may do these things. 200 years ago, there were more likely to be, a bit more of an agrarian, or a lot more people in the agrarian culture as opposed to in the industrial culture. And so their amount of time that they were spending in daylight and stuff has shifted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point when you talk about, bringing daylight into a space. If you're outside all day long in the fields as you're farming, maybe you're not worried about how much daylight is in your home because you're just not in there. You go in there to sleep and have a meal, and that's it.
I think that COVID was this wonderful, not that COVID was wonderful, that it was a wonderful
silver linings.
Yeah, silver linings. Yeah, good call. One of the silver linings of it was we realized that our homes were built for places that we came and went from, except for on the weekends. And even then we come and go because we don't grow the food just out the back door. We don't do those things. We go to supermarkets, we go to different places, and we go to work during the day and we come home, the rest of the time. So we're often in our homes during our evenings, not just during our daytimes. And all of a sudden, the awakening is that we don't design, or homes haven't been designed for being at home, and yet now suddenly people are at home. Suddenly people are there. And previously it was the cat's house all day long, and then it became humans interacted with the cat in the evening. It's
talking to owners about their work from home spaces and my work from home space. I'm in my home almost all the time now, and so you have a very different relationship with that space, and what you require from it changes.
Yeah, I think this is it's like the great awakening of our lack of how easy it is to have a lack of interaction with nature. And I went to a house recently because I do the TV show, and I went to this house recently, and in Japan, and I can't think of the term of it off the top of my head, sorry, but one of our listeners may be able to tell us. In Japan, they often put a tree inside a home. So they'll have a courtyard with a tree. And if they can't put a tree, they'll take a log of a tree, and they'll use it, as a support or whatever within it. And I went to a home that was in Brisbane in Australia, beautifully kind of architecturally taken this old house and then added new to it and made a really interesting journey out of it. And one of the things they did in the courtyard of it is they had some stumps that were from the original house. And these stumps were around about, I'm trying to do it in yours, 10 feet tall. And they were just gnarled trees. They were just chopped off. They were all shaped and gnarled, debarked, but shaped and gnarled. And, like they were just when they were cut out of the forest and dragged there to site. And they had one of these exposed in a courtyard covered garden. And that was their Japanese touch point of they had all the elements there. So they had the fire pit, they had water, they had gardens, they had shaded overhead, but with light being able to come down and through from some modern structure and some old structure. They had some stone walls. They had all these touch points in that space. And they had this one stump that they had kept from another part where it had to be pulled down, and they'd kept that particular stump and then set that in there. And I remember getting the story from the architect as they were working on developing the design for the home, creating this magical piece and taking it from that Japanese story and then putting it into the space. And that gave a history touch point as well as a physical touch point. It wasn't a beautifully milled piece of timber. It was gnarled and of its time. It changes the feel of something. And I go, oh, okay. I need to find my, in designs that I do, I need to find those pieces as well. It's beautiful learning of seeing other people's work and the stories and stuff that we get to share.
Creates a beautiful story for each home.
It really does. Well, Kory, thank you so much for sharing. I did really love the daylighting and the sunlighting. I think that for people, and then also those other pieces of the conversation around, what makes orientation so important. And for people who maybe are not building a custom home, maybe they're just buying a production home, how you can better look at the site, how you can better get an idea. And if you are going to build a custom home, take your architect with you. Get your architect there and make sure they understand what we talked about as well, because not all architects do. Understand that land right early on and get to know that they understand how it will be different in each space and then how they're going to deal with that on this piece of land. And then, make your dreams come true. Build a dream. I'm looking forward to our next catch up.
Yeah, me too. This has been a great conversation. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning into our conversation. I hope it left you both informed and inspired. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen. And please don't hesitate to share your design thoughts with me. It's always a joy to hear from you. If you're like me and crave a deeper dive into design thinking, coupled with a love for travel and adventure, consider one of my architectural adventures. Join me and some of my wonderful design friends and embark on a journey of a lifetime. Apply for an unforgettable design experience at adrianramsey.com. With our clients spanning the globe, I firmly believe behind every great project are great people. If you're a great person and seeking to turn your dream into a reality, I'd be honored to design your home with you. Why not join the ranks of our exceptional clients and let's make your heart sing? Reach out to me at studio@ardesignhouse.com. That's studio@ardesignhouse.com, and let's get a conversation going and make your heart sing.